suva undique, lily and the rose I lay. Floret suva undique, sweet in the air till dark of day. The bonniest pair you ever seen play chasey on the meadies green. Floret suva undique, the lily and the rose I lay.
Under my old moss, and the girls in silent bands go to Clachan as in the beginning, and return from Clachan, from Seisnish and the land of the living, each one.
Exalted. I shall not die, but live and declare the works of the Lord. The Lord hath chastened me sore, but he hath not given me over unto death. Open to me the gates of righteousness. I will go into them. I will go into them, and I will praise the Lord.
Remarried, and this king, when he remarried, the stepmother took a hating to this girl. So she was going one day for a pitcher of water, and she let the pitcher fall. So she put the blame on the daughter. So she says to her stepmother, she says, look, she says, for God's sake, she says, leave me alone. So the girl sets away. The father drives her out. She had nowhere to go. She was just left alone. So she says to herself, she says, I must go away. So she married this great fellow and he was called up to the army. And when he was called up to the army, she left in childbirth. So she wasn't able and nowhere to stay. She had nowhere to stay at all. So she was just on the run. So there was born a young son. So her father came up to her. She says, look, she
Well, good evening. Thank you for coming. Lovely to see you all here. My name is Gauri West. It's my pleasure to be hosting this evening. Maybe I should start by just telling you that you have come to the right place. You haven't gone into a rave by mistake or an acid house party, whatever that might be. Although the night is young. Those were all just extracts of the work of Martyn Bennett. And Martyn is the kind of glue holding this together tonight. He's the backdrop, if you like. Martyn was a phenomenal musician, an artist. I'm sure some of us in the room knew him. Some of you might have known him well. And people on the stage about to join me, some of them knew him also. And Martyn was a piper, various kinds of pipes. He was a hugely talented piper. He was a whistle player, a flute player. He was an exceptional classical violinist, classically trained, and viola and piano. He was a composer. He was a programmer. He was a sound designer. He was many, many things. And he did them all to an exceptional standard as well. Tragically, his life was very short. He died 20 years ago. 2005, which is very hard to believe it's that long, and he was just 33 when he passed. But, and so any gathering where we remember Martyn or talk about him or are inspired by him, I suppose there's always this kind of underscore of sadness, inevitably, and yet he was, as anyone who knew him will testify, I'm sure, a very inspirational young man. And even 20 years after his passing, his influence is immense, actually. If you go around any of the generation who have come through music in Scotland since, and I meet a lot of them in my work, various kinds of work, they all, almost to a person, name-check Martyn as one of their major influences. And I would say his influence and his legacy actually is increasing year by year. Rather than going the other way. But why Martyn Bennett at a storytelling festival? Well, as you may have picked up in those short clips of 8 of his tracks, there are voices in all of them. Voices telling stories in different ways. Traditional tales, as we heard at the end there, but stories in song and ballads in Scots and in Gaelic and in other languages too. Stories in poetry, stories of spiritual beginnings, religious texts, Psalm 118 in the case of what we just heard there. Earlier this year, a book came out that I wrote about Martyn. Martyn's biography, essentially, Brave New Music. It's called The Martyn Bennett Story. That's my early plug for my book this evening. But Dan Abercrombie of the Storytelling Centre and Festival read the book, and he got in touch and he said it was quite marked once he read the book and listened to the tracks, just how central storytelling of various kinds was to Martyn's music. And it was very astute observation, actually. I could have chosen any number of other tracks where there were voices telling stories in some shape or form. And so Dan suggested that perhaps we could put an evening together of stories and reminiscences and music and so on that really reflect and celebrate Martyn's music and his love of storytelling from many, many parts of the world. Just before we bring on our guests, just I should name check the voices we heard there, because Martyn would have insisted on that, quite rightly. You may have recognised some of them. The first one, Hamish Henderson. Hamish probably needs little introduction to a storytelling audience, but one of the massive figures of 20th century Scotland. Poet, storyteller himself, songwriter, folklorist, collector, agitator for social justice, political justice, and so on, and a close friend of Martyn and his family, almost a grandfatherly figure, actually, to Martyn. We just heard him recite a little bit of one of his poems, telling basically the story of a pleasant Sunday afternoon on the Meadeys Green, the meadows in Edinburgh. We heard also after that Jimmy Macbeth from the northeast telling the tale in song of James Macpherson heading off to the gallows. We'll hear more about that a little later, I think. We heard Lizzie Higgins, amazing powerful voice of the Northeast Travellers, singing of unrequited love in the Blackbird. You'll notice most songs of love in Scotland are of the unrequited variety. Quite how we sustained a population at all. There wasn't much requiting going on in the past. But, or maybe there was a lot of requiting, it just wasn't worth singing about. Maybe it was. Who else did we have there? We had Sorley MacLean, of course, one of the great poets, European poets of the 20th century, telling of the desolation of his native Rasse in his poem Halig, when 96 families were cleared in the mid-19th century, his own included. Margaret Bennett, Martyn's mother, singing in Gaelic a story as a rhythmic work song. We heard Michael Mara, the Bard of Lochee, the wonderful gravelly voice there, reciting extract from Psalm 118. We heard Sheila Stewart, that other great voice of the travelling people, one of the other great voices of the travelling people, talking of her people being moved on. And we'll hear more about that later too as well. And finally, Davy Stewart telling the story of daughter Doris. A pretty gory tale, well known right through the Indo-European family of languages, actually. Usually catalogued as the daughter or the girl or the maiden without hands. So these were the voices, and just a sample of how Martyn integrated storytelling into his work and his music. This is a gathering? This is a gathering. Come on in. Come on in. Yes. Please do. Yeah, I thought you were never coming tonight. Please welcome James MacDonald Reid.
This is our friend Gauri from, she's in here, from Argyll. If that's confusing you.
Gauri Raje. And of course the inimitable Jess Smith. So, we're here really just to, as I said, keep Martyn in memory, maybe have a little chat about him and some of his work, but just, it's the spirit of Martyn we're here to celebrate, really. And the people we have on stage really are in some ways representing three of the traditions that was very dear to Martyn. The Scottish Gaelic tradition, we heard his mum sing a Gaelic song. Martyn, although born in Newfoundland, moved back to Scotland with Margaret when he was very young and used to go around a lot of folk festivals. Margaret, a folklorist and collector, of course. So he, well, that's the other thing. He pretty well knew every voice that he used, the people behind the voices that he used in his work. So Jamie, in many respects, is representing the Gaelic tradition. Jess, very much the traveller tradition. Martyn knew a lot of travellers and was very fond of them. and just was amazed at the power of their culture and of their song, and we'll hear more about that from Jess. And Martyn knew no boundaries really in terms of where he drew his influences from. He was very internationalist. That's reflected in his music and any chats anyone ever had with Martyn. He was a magpie. He would collect things, bits of culture, bits of stories, bits of tunes from anywhere he found them. He travelled widely as a musician, and his music represents that. So representing the international connection generally. Delighted that Gauri is with us this evening too. So guys, that's my bit done. It's over to you now. Jamie, if I could maybe just start with you, because I suppose of all of us, you worked closely with Martyn, and I know we're going to get some stories and tales and anecdotes from you, but I'd like to hear first of all just where you first met Martyn and in what context.
Well, I knew his mother, Margaret, quite well, and they were staying in Keniusi, but they moved to Edinburgh when he was just 13, 14. Mm-hmm. And I got to know him quite well then. And I knew him right up to his death. In fact, when he died, I was the first person his mother phoned to tell me. And she asked me to write an obituary, but I said, no, that should be Jim Gilchrist. So I phoned Jim Gilchrist to do it. And I was one of the pallbearers at it. So I had a long, very deep friendship with him. At the time I first met him, I was putting together a small folk ensemble where we're doing traditional dance in the old way, together with the music and the song and so on, and presenting them as they work together, so they're not really separate entities and not stylized to fit contemporary fashion. So he fit into that because he could dance and sing and play the pipes, and he was learning the fiddle at that time. But of course, the topic is travellers, and about that time, the well-known traveller Willie McPhee and his wife Belle, they stayed in a caravan site just outside of Perth, the Almond Vale, wasn't it? And it flooded, and so they had nowhere to stay. They lost everything. But Margaret's mother and her uncle Peter stayed in Balchudder at that time, and so they put them up. And we did some wee sessions with them there and got to know them quite well. I spent a lot of time with the McPhees and Martyn. I mean, I think that was something we did together a lot. And I can remember a wee anecdote that Willie McPhee told to both me and Martyn, so I'll share it now. Just a short one. It seems that there was an elderly traveller going through the countryside with a very young traveller who was just new to travelling around, in fact. And they were very hungry. They came upon a small farmhouse. So the older traveller says to the younger one, listen, I'll teach you a trick to get fed. We'll get a reasonable meal out of this, I'm sure, but don't do it too often and don't tell other people. We don't want to let them know it's a trick. So he went out to the pasture and found among the cow pies, there was one that was quite dry. And he just peeled the grass from it, put it up on his hand as if he's delivering a pizza, and chaps on the door. And the woman comes to the door and says, what can I do for you? And he says, listen, this is all we've got for our lunch. Do you mind us borrowing a bit of salt and pepper just to make it, give it more flavour? And the woman says, is that all you have for your lunch? Oh, come inside, I'll give you I've got some stew going in here, I'll give you some bread and so on. So he had a great meal. Years later, the young traveller's grown up, he's on his own. He gets very hungry and he comes across a farm and he remembers the trick. So he goes out to the pasture, finds a nice dried up cow pat, peels it off the grass, puts it on his hand like he's delivering a pizza, goes and chaps on the door. Farmer comes to the door, says, well, what do you want? And he says, well, excuse me, sir, but this is all I got for my lunch. It's just a dried up cow pat, and could I have a bit of salt and pepper to give it some flavour? The farmer says, is that all you've got for your lunch, an old cow pat? Come around the back, I'll get you a fresh one. But I have thousands of memories of Martyn, we did some residence. In fact, even when he was at the height of doing his music, he'd done the dreadlocks and all that, and he was still doing gigs with me, just the two of us, and sometimes with Margaret. We did one the festival every year called The Spirit of Scotland at the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I remember on my way to be picked up by Margaret and Martyn once. I was going through the Princess Street Gardens with Joe Bonner, and there was a talent contest going on, and we heard the announcer saying, our next contestant is Bonnie Wilson from Bonnyrigg, and she's going to be accompanied by her father-in-law on the piano, or brother-in-law on the piano, or something like that. And she comes up to it with this big vicuña sweater, and she says, I'd like to dedicate this song to Edith Piaf. And it was John Bonner who then said, she's going to sing, Regrets, I've no regrets. And I laughed my head off. So I told that to Martyn later that evening, and apparently he named a song after it.
He did.
But that was the background behind it.
Lovely.
Yeah, he was a delight to work with, and he covered all bases. He could sing, he could dance, did the whole works. He was also quite interested in Slavic music, and I had lived in Bulgaria, and my flat was full of Bulgarian instruments and records and Serbian ones, Slovak and so on. And he used to borrow those. He would borrow, there were LPs that I dragged back from Eastern Europe in the 60s, and he sampled them and used them quite a lot. So there we are.
Jess, as I said there in my introductory comments, he was very close to a lot of travellers. He met them at folk festivals and so on with his mum and others. He was very careful about how he used their material, and I remember chatting to him about this because, of course, there's this fine line, I guess, between cultural celebration and cultural appropriation, if you like, of when are you paying tribute to something and when are you stealing it. And he was very, very conscious of this, and he lost a lot of sleep about it, I think. But I know that Sheila Stewart, who you knew well, gave full permission and so on, as everyone gave permission. But from your point of view, as part of that travelling community, what's your thoughts about what Martyn did with your culture?
I never met Martyn, but his mother, I knew her very well. And she was always among the travellers, and it wasn't unusual to go to the berries and see Margaret standing there pulling the berries and singing away in Gaelic and that. So it was kind of just part of her life. Everybody had the wee laddie. Sheila called him the wee laddie. And one day she phoned me up and she says, "Oh, wait till I tell you this, you'll never believe it." I says, "What's up with you?" "Oh, Jess, I don't know what I'm going to do. The wee laddie has put music to my voice." Now, this was not allowed. The ballads had their own music, they had their own message, they had everything in them, and you were giving over this part of history, the travelling, the ballads singing. And her mother just hammered that into her, don't you ever take any interference into your voice. You deliver the ballad, and that's that. Her Uncle Donald, who taught her a lot of ballads, he was the same, never allow music. And I says, "What have you done?" She says, "The wee laddie's put music to one of my songs." "Oh," she says, "I can't allow it, I can't allow it." "Wait till you hear it." I says, "Well, can I hear it?" So David and I were heading over to see her the next day, but she played it over the phone. I said, "That's fantastic. Absolutely, I love it." And she says, "What do you mean love it?" I said, "Well, it's not a ballad. For a start off, Ewan MacColl wrote the Moving On song, and it's nothing to do with interfering and upsetting the rhythm and the voice and the heart of the ballad. So yeah, go for it. But what folks say," I says, "Listen, that's a young laddie and he's writing music for young voices, and what a fantastic way to introduce your culture to the young in a forum that it'll gel with the youngsters, because only then does the bird continue to fly. Because if you take the wings or the wind, the bird will not fly. So keep that in. And she thought, is it good? But he's got me roaring. I didn't roar. I says, I ken you didn't. She says, but I'll need to listen to it 2 or 3 times. So she said to me, sing it to me. I says, Sheila, you know the song, sing it. Let me hear you singing it, and I'll be able to ken if he's doing it at the right time. So I'll maybe just hear a wee crack at it for you now.
Please do, yeah.
See if I can remember it. Ewan MacColl, as I say, and he wrote it for the Stewarts of Blair. He spent ages in Rattery in their wee house and gathering the culture up, and he felt this was an appropriate song and moving on song. Let's see if I can have a go at it. And please, if you sing it, get your voice in there. It's like we're having a bit of fun here. Born in the middle of the afternoon in a horse-drawing wagon in the oldie five. A big 12-wheeler shook my bed. You can't stay here. The policeman said, you better be born in someplace else. So move along, get along, move along, get along, go, move, shift. Born in the trailer in a builder's yard, where the ground is rutted by the trailer's wheels. The local people said to me, you'll ruin the price of property. You better be born in someplace else. So move along, get along, move along, get along, go, move, shift. Born in the tatty lifting time in an elbow tent and a tatty field. The farmer said, your work's a done. It's time that yous was moving on. You better be born in someplace else. So move along, get along, move along, get along, go, move, shift. Born at the back of a blackthorn hedge, where the white hoarfrost lay all around. No wise men came bearing gifts, only the order came to shift. You'd better be born in someplace else. So move along, get along, move along, get along, go, move, shift. Wagon, tent, or trailer born last week, last year, or in far off days. Born here or 1,000 miles away, there's always men nearby who'll say, you'd better be born in someplace else. So move along, get along, move along, get along, go, move, shift. Now Sheila sang that to the Pope, the late Pope John Paul, Bellahouston Park, when he visited Scotland in Glasgow. There were thousands and thousands of people there, and he asked for an audience with Sheila. And it was 1984, I believe, and she was shaking with nerves, really was terrified. But she met with the good man, and he said to her, I will never forget what the song that you sang to me. He says, not for the culture, he says, and not for the areas within the culture. It was that traveller hadn't even been born. That, he says, well, I will never forget. So Sheila loved that song, but she didn't mind that lovely music that was played then.
Yeah, I think she ended up I think you persuaded her to like it. I think that, yeah. Just before we move off of that theme, Jess, did you experience some of the things that Ewan MacColl was writing about there in your own early days, getting shifted, moved on.
I was 5 years of age when we moved into a bus. My father bought this Bedford bus. My mother had a heart attack nearly. She says, "Child, I'm not living in a bus." And he says, "Ginny, all our days of horses and carts and tents," he says, "is all over now." He says, "We'll go on the road." She says, "Charlie, the government have given our children a free education. Let's get our bairns all educated," she says, "and let them get every chance that everyone else has. To do that, we need to have an address, because the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the cruelty officers, are too keen to go into the tents and take a wee travelling bairn and say, a wee fat travelling bairn, and say, 'Oh, look at this malnourished child,' and the bairn's away. Canada, Australia, never seen again." My mother thought we'd die or anything like that happened to us. So she wanted a house, she wanted an address, knowing fine that the travellers in Scotland were mainly agricultural workers in Scotland, especially Central Belt, was a massive farm. You know, it was berries, tatties, peas, gooseberries, strawberries, everything was growing, and we were the ones that went out and gathered them in. So we were safe enough. And during the harvesting time, we were okay. We were okay pulling the brock wool off the fields, the wool that the sheep discards. We were okay with that. We even got to keep that wool. We could sell it to the ragman because it's proper wool, but every penny counted. And my father only wanted to do that. He just come through the war. 6 years he's been told what to do, go here, go there, do that, go up there and get killed. He was full of shrapnel, he was in a tank, a bomb exploded, and he come home and all he wanted to do was to regain his freedom. To get up in the morning and have his breakfast and wash his hands and shave and jump in his motor and go. And the bus provided that. But for my mother, that's too near the government. They would just see that and they would come in, the police, and say, "Oh, these kids are malnourished," and take them away. She says, so the bus was to be the bane of her decisions after the war. That was 1953, so it's a good few years after the war. But when my father got a stair carpet, Axminster and Wilton, after he'd gutted it all out and put in a stove and a cupboard and beds and everything, and he went and he put the stair carpet. Now, a stair carpet in the bus is a fitted carpet, so it was right up the gangway of the bus. And when my mother came in and she saw and she put her finger in, it went up, you know, "Oh, that's lovely, Charlie." So we'll stay there for a year, Charlie, and that's it. And then we'll get a house and we'll settle and we'll go on the road in the summer. That should sort us out. I was 5 that day. I was 15 when that bus was scrapped. So my whole young life, the most crucial years of anyone's life, and I was there when the police banged on the bus, and my father says, "What is it? Where's all the drunks? Where's all this? Take him away, come back." And he'd go in and sit away all night. My mother would be up worried. He'd come in and he'd sit there and we'd all be looking at him. "You okay, Daddy? You okay?" "I am fine, I'm fine." Police, grand lads, had a good crack at them, or playing cards and things like that. And my mother would say to him, "Oh, so wait and play now, bairns." And I was my father's wee lassie. I was the middle one. There was 4 of us born before the war, 4 of us born after the war. So I was the one that was going to be the maiden aunt. I knew how to drive at age 12. So I was going to look after my mother and father, and I was going to be the maiden aunt. The rest of them get married and do what they wanted. But he couldn't take his bonnet off, and I thought, that's strange. Why is he not taking his bonnet off? He couldn't, because the blood had congealed around where they'd hammered him most of the night. He got 6 months in Perth prison for reset. And when I was doing my research on those 10 years to write my books, I spoke to the police and I said, "You got 6 months for recess." And the guy on the other end of the phone just laughed. He says, "Nobody gets prison for reset." And I says, "Well, he did." And he was a travelling man. So my grandfather used to say, when a travelling man goes into a court of law, justice goes out the back door. So but you know, it helps you to understand humanity. It gives you an idea about the weakness in people, and to be thankful that you don't suffer from those weaknesses like bullying and things like that. But I'll give you that. I used to get bullied in school, in the secondary school, and there was a big fella, it was in Kirkcaldy in Viewforth Academy, and he was a school bully, and he was in my class, and he always saw me, and you get your hair pulled, a kick in the shin and things like that. And I remember going in, and we were staying in the bus in a place called Oswald Road in Kirkcaldy. It was a used to be a brick factory. And I went in and I plonked myself down, and my Uncle Joe was visiting. And he says, "Will that be a?" I said, "Oh, just a silly bully, just another one." He says, one day I says, I'm going to have a rope in my school bag, and I'm going to jump off the railway bridge, and I'm going to make sure his head's in that loop before I pull it. No, he says, "That's not how you beat bullies. That's what they would do." No, he says, "Here's what you do. Invite them to a party. And say you wondered if you want to come. I'm inviting everybody that wants to come, and say your Uncle Joe has come home, and if they ask where he's been, say Berlin." And then if you say, "What was he in there for?" "Oh, nothing much. He just got a bit busy with an axe one night," and kind of. And they'll no bother you again.
Words of wisdom, indeed.
Try that.
Gauri,
Uh-huh.
delighted you could join us tonight. Maybe you could tell us about what you're wearing, first of all, because we're feeling underdressed here, and you look this.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for inviting me. This is actually when yourself and Daniel contacted me, was the first time I'd heard of Martyn Bennett. So I'm just giving a disclaimer. But since then, I've kind of been listening to the music, and it's been really interesting. What am I wearing? I'm wearing a sari, which is, this is ordinary, everyday wear. It's a cotton sari. And I thought, in homage to the international nature of Martyn's music, well, let me just put on my gear.
Good. So yeah, as you said, Martyn's music was new to you. I know you're very interested in people and cultures and anthropology, as well as being a storyteller. I felt very much that Martyn was in many ways a bit of an anthropologist. He was very interested in people, their culture, wherever they came from. He would chat to anybody at length, and I'm sure you'll agree, Jamie, hopefully, he was very welcoming. He was a very sociable creature. Having listened to his music, can you hear some? It was also, for me, I think, in an earlier book I wrote, that he was one of the most spiritual artists I'd ever come across, actually, in his music and just chatting to him. What was your reaction to his music? And
couple of things, I suppose. I think my first response when I listened to some of the tracks was just how mischievous it was. There's a trickster element to it, which I thought, this impulse allows him to push boundaries. And not necessarily in an appropriative way. It kind of teases and plays around. So I had images of certain stories coming to me. And secondly, there was something, I'm glad that I got to hear you talk about the traveler influence, because there's something about the beats of his music which is quite which echoes what we call the Banjara music, which is the travelers in the western part of India, where I come from, which is kind of desert country, but we have the Banjaras who were, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but it's the word that I grew up hearing, which is, if you translated Banjara, they would be the equivalent of what we would call gypsies, a traveler lifestyle. and great music that comes from these communities, because they are responding to the music of the desert and very strong beats. So there was something about that echo in Martyn's music which I felt like, oh, it's almost familiar but not quite. So
Yeah.
quite intriguing.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah. And there's one particular track that you might talk about or tell stories about, maybe now, maybe later, but about Kali.
Yeah.
The Tongues of Kali, and I was intrigued about this because it's one of his tracks of music that doesn't have well, it does have voices in it, speaking in tongues almost, but there's no actual story. But to me, it was the beginning of a story. It was, why did he call it this? And it sounds like there's a story there to be told. But we'll maybe leave that, keep your powder dry for a little later with that one. But you are a traveller in some senses. You've come here from India. You've made your home from one West Coast to another West Coast.
Yes.
And you've brought your stories and culture with you. Is there something you'd like to share with us whether
about the experience of
yes, or a story, or yes, let's.
Okay.
Kali.
Yeah. So I think that track, when I first heard it, it really surprised me, because I sort of was coming with this idea that the music would kind of, have a sense of the intensity of Kali as a goddess. And Kali, for those of you who do know about, anyone familiar with Kali, the Indian goddess Kali? I think a lot of people now are quite familiar. She is kind of, this goddess who's dark. Some say jet black, depending on which version of Kali you're looking at. She is, she's fierce. She treads the wild. She is the wild goddess. She's the only goddess we know who doesn't have a childhood. She arrives as a being. There is no kind of pussyfooting or treading around her, and you don't want to get her upset. She can take on Shiva, who is, the destroyer. So I was expecting the music to, kind of hearken to that. And I was really intrigued by the track because it kind of touched on another aspect of Kali, which is she can be quite a trickster. She's quite subversive, and she can catch you off guard. She has a sense of humor. And in India, our gods and goddesses are not up there. We don't only hold them in reverence and awe. They are part of us. We are part of them. So very often, you will have lots of stories of Kali that are folk stories, because she is our village goddess. She's our Gram Devi. She is our Kul Devi. She's our family goddess, which means that, the relationship is intimate. And if Kali is your Gram Devi, your village goddess, or your Kul Devi, you're allowed to get mad at her. and there you can bargain with her, you can, curse her, and she will respond in the way she believes is right in the moment. So it's kind of so yeah, we have a lot of kind of folk tales around Kali. And when I heard that particular track of the Tongues of Kali, initially I thought I'd bring a little myth of Kali, but that track touched on something that was so earthy and so everyday experience of the goddess. So I thought, okay, I know a story to bring, and perhaps we'll.
Do you want to go for that now?
Shall I?
Yeah.
Are you ready to hear a story? Okay. So, who thought Martyn Bennett and a story from India? Okay, here we go. So this is a story that comes from the villages of India. So the beginning of this story is not new. It's not new at all. There is a daughter-in-law, and a daughter-in-law who's a long-suffering daughter-in-law. She has a mother-in-law who's not particularly pleasant. I mean, not just not pleasant, she's downright nasty. She believes that her daughter-in-law is somebody who is a free pair of hands, a bit of labor that her precious son has brought into the house, and good on him. So the daughter-in-law ends up working all day, cleaning the cow sheds, washing the clothes, holding up to the moods of the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law shouts at her when she's not feeling too good. She's just a piece of labor, nothing else. And while her husband isn't any better, he is what we might call a mama's boy. He loves his mother loves him back, and that bond is tight. So, yeah, this another person will, keep her place in the house. Now, all of that would have been fine. It was a time when women sort of expected harsh treatment in the beginning in their husbands' homes. So for the daughter-in-law, it was perfectly okay that she had to do all the work. She had to clean the clothes, the cow shed. What didn't quite gel with her was that she was not allowed into the kitchen. She was not allowed to cook, and when the food was ready, all she got were just scraps. After her husband had eaten, after the mother-in-law had eaten, a few scraps. Now, what bothered her even more was that her mother-in-law made this particular kind of curry, which was made from a vegetable called a snake gourd. Anyone seen a snake gourd? It's not a particularly tasty vegetable. In fact, it's bitter, but it's in the craft of cooking it. The way you cook it, you kind of put it in salt water first, let it stew a little bit in salt water, draw the bitterness out, and then you cook it with turmeric and asafoetida and a little bit of hint of chili and cumin. And by the time you finished cooking it, it tastes like heaven. And her mother-in-law was particularly good at making the snake gourd curry, the parval curry as we call it. But the mother-in-law, do you think she gave anything to the daughter-in-law? Nothing. The daughter-in-law, that stuck. That was the one thorn, and she determined she was going to get that curry. So one day as the mother-in-law was, just about to put some spices into the gourd curry that she was preparing, her daughter-in-law came running in, beating her chest. Mama, Mama, you don't know what I have heard, your sister. The mother-in-law couldn't believe it. She said, my sister, what's happened to my sister? They're saying that she met with an accident and she's drawing her last breath. You must hurry. The mother-in-law, she dropped everything as anyone would. She said, take care of this, finish the lunch. And she rushed off, my sister, baya, baya, baya. She ran off. As soon as she'd done that, the daughter-in-law knew she had half a day because the sister's village was a bit away. She began to prepare the snake gourd curry just as she'd seen her mother-in-law prepare it. and she made loads of it. She went out into the field and she got a few more snake gourds. She was going to eat that curry today. And just when that aroma was wafting and teasing her nostrils and her taste buds, she suddenly remembered her husband. She'd forgotten to cook for him. He had to eat first before she did. So she quickly prepared some rice and some dal and maybe a little egg curry kind of a thing. And when he came home, she fed him all that she had made except for the snake gourd curry. That was hers. He ate as he did, didn't even notice, went for his afternoon siesta, and that was her chance. She put all that snake gourd curry in a pot, and these are big water pots, and she took that pot and she placed it on her thigh, and with that pot she walked straight to the edge of the village where there is a Kali temple. Now, if you're from India or you know India, you will know that in the afternoon, temples are barren. Everyone is either in the fields or having their siesta. So she had a quiet place and she went into that temple. She closed the temple door behind her and she went into the sanctum of the goddess. Now, Kali is there in her full glory. She is having her eyes wide open, her tongue falling out, her forearms ready to bless or destroy whatever comes in. And here comes this village woman carrying this pot of curry. She sets it down. She doesn't so much look at the goddess and she begins to slurp that curry. Her tongue just tasting each little bit of that curry. Oh, the goddess was so surprised at this complete disengagement with her and the amount that this ordinary woman could eat. She put her hand right over her mouth, her tongue gone in. And that's how she stayed. The daughter-in-law didn't notice anything. Oh, she licked every little bit of that curry, and when she was done, she walked out of the temple extremely satisfied. Now, as evening fell and people came to the temple for the prayers, a terror ran through that village. The goddess has changed. The goddess has shifted. Does anyone know the news stories these days of the comet that's going to be passing Earth? And there are all sorts of theories about it. Apparently it's not a comet. It's supposed to be an alien ship, etc., etc. A similar wave of terror. I don't know why alien things always create terror. People were talking about this goddess. She didn't have her tongue falling out like Kali should. She had closed her mouth with her own hand. This was an ill omen. Children were going to die. Crops were going to fail. Measles was going to strike the village. All sorts of rumors floated about and sacrifices began to be given. Prayers were made, but would the goddess move her hand? Not really. And finally, the priest sent the word out. Whoever can get the goddess to return to her original form will be well rewarded. Aha. So the daughter-in-law, she looked at her mother-in-law and she said, I think I can do this. Huh, said the mother-in-law. You have some dreams. But the daughter-in-law, she wasn't going to be stopped. She announced to the entire village, I will bring the goddess back as she should be. And of course, when she went to the temple, there was a whole line of villagers following her, extremely curious to know what was going to happen. In one hand was a broomstick. In her other hand was a bag filled with trash. And our daughter-in-law walked into the temple. As she entered the inner sanctum of the goddess, she looked at everyone and she said, I need to do this work in peace. And she closed the door once again. As soon as she had closed the door, she turned to the goddess and she said, "Hey, who do you think you are, huh? Are you that starved that you're jealous of one woman eating so much to her heart's desire for one single day that you create such a tamasha, such chaos in the village? Why don't you bring your tongue out?" The goddess just looked at this woman like, who is she? I don't know this person that I'm supposed to guard. Well, it looks like you're not going to change your form, are you? Right, you need some punishment, I think. And she picked up that broomstick and began to hit the goddess. The goddess was so surprised and a bit hurt that her hand fell off from her mouth. What about the tongue? The goddess couldn't figure out what was going on. And so the woman, she opened the garbage bag and she threw the garbage onto the goddess along with a few more whacks. "Out with the tongue," she said. And the goddess, now she was a bit afraid, because what she was seeing in front of her was an ordinary woman suddenly beginning to transform into a form of herself, a form of Kali. She had a whack that competed with Kali's power, and she was whacking Kali from her behind, and Kali's tongue just fell out. That's more like it. Now behave and don't scare the villagers again. And saying that, she opened the door and oh, glory be, the villagers were ecstatic. They had found a savior and their goddess had returned. Everyone was happy, except for the mother-in-law. She was terrified. My daughter-in-law has the power to change the goddess, to influence the goddess. If she's not a witch, she is a goddess. She is not labor. And she looked at her son and she said, we've got to get rid of her. This much of power in the house we cannot sustain. So that night, when the daughter-in-law was sleeping, they wrapped her up in the duvet and they both carried her outside to the field. And the daughter-in-law, of course, woke up. They had gagged her so she couldn't say anything. But when they got to the fields, the daughter-in-law heard the mother-in-law say, let's go look for some twigs and some wood. We've got to burn her and get rid of her. So off they went. And the daughter-in-law, well, she managed to somehow get out of the bonds, remove the gag. And she knew that field really well. She knew there was a big log of wood on one end of the field. So she brought it and she wrapped it up in the mattress. And then she went to the forest which bordered the field, climbed up onto the banyan tree there, waiting to see what would happen. Of course, the two came back with a lot of twig. They lit what they thought was the daughter-in-law. And you know that log of wood had some really big knots in it. So when the fire got to the knots in the wood, there were loud pops and cracks. And the mother-in-law is thinking to herself, good, that's her skull. That's gone. Good. Now we can go home. So the mother and the son go home and they sleep very well. But as the fire was burning, the daughter-in-law heard something. Underneath that banyan tree, her adventures weren't quite over. There was a gang of robbers. They had had a good night. They were distributing the spoils, lots of gold and diamonds, etc. And one of them happened to look up and smell the smoke. And so he decided to climb up that banyan tree and see what was going on. He climbed up the banyan tree and then blinked because in front of him there was a little foot dangling with a beautiful little anklet. And as he looked up, he saw this woman who was saying to him, "Shh, oh, you're gorgeous. I am a celestial being. I've been sent from the heavens to look for a man who will marry me, and you look just the ticket. You're so handsome, but shh, you must be quiet." Now the robber couldn't believe it. It was like he had died and gone to heaven. And he said, "Are you for real?" She said, "Yes." Shh. The man, he couldn't help it. He climbed onto the branch next to her and bent over to kiss her. And she said, "You can't. We're not yet married, you see. But I tell you what." And in India, we have these things we do with our saris. We tie little things at the edge of the sari. So she opened the bundle, and in it was a beetle leaf. And she said, "I'm just going to pop this beetle leaf on your tongue. Open it, open it." And of course, he was going to do exactly what she said. So she put the beetle leaf on his tongue, and she said, "You know, if I don't want to say it, but if you put the beetle leaf with your tongue onto my tongue, you know, we will be as good as married." Oh, that was all the invitation he needed. The robber, he closed his eyes, extended his tongue, and it went out looking for hers. And just as he found her mouth, she bit hard onto it, and she clean chopped that tongue off. He gave a yell of pain, and he fell right down onto the ground. The other robbers looked up, and all they could see was their friend with blood streaming out and going blah, 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 couldn't talk, and they just thought there were demons in that banyan tree, and they ran. They scarpered. She picked up all the wealth. And you might think she would have gone away and this is the happily ever after, but no, her happily ever after was quite different, because she walked straight back to the house of the mother-in-law, where she knocked on the door, and when the mother-in-law opened the door, she fainted. When she came to, her daughter-in-law was massaging her forehead. "Are you okay?" But I thought you were. Yes, I when you cremated me, I did go to Yama's kingdom, the Lord of Death. His messengers took me there, and when Yama saw me, he started shouting at his messengers. He said, "She is not the woman you were supposed to bring. You were supposed to bring her mother-in-law. She is the evil one." And when I heard that, mother-in-law, I begged Yama. I fell at his feet, and I said to him, "You were such a fine woman. It was not your fault. This is how women are treated. But, you know, he should spare you." And Yama, he was so touched by what I was asking, that he gave me all this wealth, and he sent me back here. But he has a message for you. He said he's going to be keeping an eye on you. And if you did ever treat anyone badly, he's going to get his messengers to take you to his kingdom and put you in a vat of hot oil. But I am just reporting what was said to me by the great Lord of Death. And so it was that from that day onwards, she was treated very well indeed. She lived like a queen in a house where she was supposed to be a laborer. And Kali watched over them all.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. We can see why Martyn was moved to compose a track called The Tongues of Kali. I don't know how many of the stories he knew, but certainly the mischievous thing, that picks up very nicely in his music and in his character. As you well know, Jimmy, because you worked with him. Bringing things back maybe to part of his roots through his mum, the Gaelic culture. Do you have something for us that either something you used to do with?
And I mustn't forget this. This is Martyn's pipe box when he was a boy. he drew the thistle on the side of it, and it got a bit floppy, it kept falling open, so his mum bought him a new one. And he got a flat quite near mine and was around my place all the time and left a lot of his stuff there. So I've got loads of Martyn's old stuff in my flat anyway. Well, when it came to the Gaelic, he never got conversant in it. He never really learned the grammar or anything like that. He would come around to me and often ask for me. I remember he came once, just came to my door and said, "What does Coolan mean?" And I said, "A puppy." And then I didn't realise he was using that as a name for his music business, but I think it's Coolin. I think this is the word, is slightly different pronunciation to do with the mountains. But something he liked very much, and when we were performing together, he would ask me to do this. And in fact, I remember a long bus journey with him where he asked me to recite some of these bardic songs, which I had. And the bardic songs are very special because they were composed by professionally trained bards to record historical instances and to make sure that the songs were always intact. They had internal rhyming schemes. So every syllable in them has a counterbalanced syllable later in the line or in the next line. There's a very distinct pattern to these, and I know quite a few of them. There's one in particular which I'll give you. It dates from February 1645, and that's a great thing about these, is because they usually report an historical instance or incident, and therefore you can date them exactly. And I'll recite a couple of lines of it for you so you can hear the internal rhyming scheme. An gol shaif sin John Tuchtúnio, Hookan Gam van Gille Chuimen, Sat Huyanam at the Nimmerst, Hookit at the Maivchen Ianain. Jedich me of Matting Donish, Gubrai Castle inner Lochi, Hunamin Taram Tolan Orstu, Sapoy of Lar, Leklan Donal. Jedagamach, Glunchoyaki, Gainig me out of sort for tappy. Get a vame huig na lasser, Serika the hush mar hacher. Now, this was composed by a man. I usually tell the whole story through, so it takes quite a long time, but I'll shorten it slightly here. The Battle of Inverlochy, which occurred in 1645, was part of a whole series of wars that were occurring all over Europe. But in this particular instance, it was the Earl of Argyll, Campbell, with his lowland levies, had sailed his galley up to where Fort William is now. And he landed it there to catch the Clondonald, who had just ransacked his lands in the middle of winter. They were under Colkeithoch, a great warrior who was by ambidextrous. He could use a sword with either hand. But as the Clondonald was going up the Great Glen toward Inverness, scouts from Keppoch, including Ian Lowme, who was a very scrawny person apparently, that's what Lowme means, warned him that the Earl of Cromarty was coming down the Great Glen to face them with an army, and that the Earl of Argyll had come in his ship and brought these lowland levies up and landed them on the shore. Well, they would be trapped between the two armies, but Ian Lowme and his buddies, who were goat herders, guided them up the side of the mountain in the snow, back through Glenroy, and when the sun rose, and that was in February, that would be quite late in the day, so they'd done this trip at night in deep snow. They were there to face and charge down the hill of the Campbells, the Earl of Argyll's lot. Well, before they charged, Colkeithoch offered a sword to Ian Lowme, and Ian Lowme said, "No, my profession is a bard. I must find a vantage point to see the battle and then record it. And so that's my task." And sure enough, the Clondonald came right down the hill, sent the Campbell levies, who had mostly come from Ayrshire, and those that managed to survive were skidding on the ice. There's still a stone marking how far they chased them down the way. And I'll give you the song now. You can join in, if you like, the chorus, which goes Hirim Horo, Horo Leha. 3 times. Hirim Horo, Horo Leha. Hirim Horo, Horo Leha. And this is the advanced line. Chayan La, Le Clonthol. The day went with Clonthol. Wel, y seif yn tŵn dy doniol, hwg yn ganfan gyda chymyn, sat chwy yn y meddyn ni marst, hwg gyda dy naif chyn I ymhain. Hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, chayan laha, lek van thon he. Yidich mi mag mathing thonish, go brai cacho in her lochi, hwrm in daram dolan orstu, a boy of lar, lek van thon he. Hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, chayan laha, lek van thon he. Jidig a mach glun cho yachi, gainim hioro, sort for tapi, get a vama huich na lasser, serika de hush, mar hacher. Hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, chayan laha, lek van thon he. Scale a batje, nooit de hikuch, if kein bellig, nan pil slieknuch, hol het dremju, maar a hikuch, le bolig laun en gjan kan briestjuch. Hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, chayan laha, lek van thon he. Lashen huil, joga joa, saun wel leich, na reich het joa, shima slut en ach moroer, van a hine gedach en toher. Hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, chayan laha, lek van thon he. Alle stedwig golle gasten, laafjes a skotten en kastjel, goeder huig het galf glassen, maar al het keil gun huru haste he. Hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, hirim horo, horo laha, chayan laha, lek van thon he. That's just a sample of it. There's 28 verses. It's very laconic and to the point and not very politically correct. There's a wonderful line in that last verse. Because coming from Ayrshire, they were known to drink kale in the wintertime, which is quite healthy. It's quite fashionable now. But for a Highlander, that was below the belt. And so the line is, MacColl Kyle gun churu aste. If they drank kale, we'll rip it out of them. But it doesn't end there, because, of course, the Earl of Argyll was destitute because the MacDonalds had not only raided Inveraray in the snow in the winter, but they just defeated his lowland army as well. And he had to sail his galley alone back to Inveraray. But the song became so popular and so quickly that it spread all the way to Inveraray Castle. And when he heard it, he put out an award of £20 Scots for anyone who would bring him Ian Lown. About a fortnight later, a tall, thin man in very extravagant West Highland clothing banged his stick on the door of Inveraray Castle. The guard said, "What do you want?" He says, "I want my £20. I'm Ian Lown." And then he reminded them of the code of hospitality. If a man has travelled more than 2 days and 2 nights, you must put them up and give them shelter and food. And so the Earl of Argyll had to take Ian Lown in as a house guest. But word is still around Inveraray. We've got an Inveraray fellow here, and they still say in Inveraray in the streets that it turns out that the Earl of Argyll quite enjoyed Ian Lown's company, found him very witty, and was happy to have him there. But, of course, he'd lost so much money in these 2 disasters that he had to sail his galley off to Greenock to speak with his bankers to get a loan to restore some of his lost property, which meant that he had to leave Ian Lown as a guest in his house. And the first night when the Earl of Argyll was away, Ian Lowme took himself a seat by the fire as he tended to do and waited for his supper to be served. And along came a big wooden bowl full of steamed limpets, which is not the best of suppers, I'll tell you that, having eaten them myself. So Ian Lowme got his little pick out, and he would pick a limpet out of the shell, pop it in his mouth, and then flick the shell into the fire, which of course would go pop. And he started doing this rhythmically. And as he was doing it, he extemporized aloud his new song about the bill of fare one would be served at Inverary Castle. And of course, the word got back to the kitchen. So the cooks came out and said, "I'm very, very sorry, that's just your starter. I have roast beef on this way." So Ian Lowme got himself a fine supper, but unfortunately, we were obviously deprived of what would have been a great song. Another postscript to that is that I knew Hamish Henderson very well, even longer than Martyn Bennett. I think I first met him in 1965 when he recorded me. He was interested in my Gaelic dialect because I had a funny way of pronouncing an L like a W, which apparently was very archaic and unique to Arasig. So he did record me back then, but and I knew him very well throughout the years. But when he was in hospital in Morningside, Ruth Frame came to visit me, a wonderful singer stays in Dundee now. And she said, "Let's go and visit Hamish. We might not see him again." So we went to visit him. And when we came in, the nurses said that he isn't recognizing anyone anymore. So Ruth came in, and indeed, he didn't recognize her, although he knew her very well. But he recognized me right off the bat. So I was quite proud of that. But he asked her to sing him a song. And so she sang Thomas the Rhymer. She wasn't a Gaelic speaker. And she sang the version that she'd learned personally from Duncan Williamson, which is quite different from the standard version. And then he asked if I would sing him a Gaelic song. So I went through various ones, and he asked me to sing Blar Innerlochi. So I sang him that one I just sang to you, and it was probably the last song he ever heard because he died the next day.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Incredible.
mm.
Thank you, Jamie. Can't believe time's getting on. We're towards the end. It's gone like this. But Jess, do you have something else for us from your cultural background? Anything you like?
Oh, well, why don't I sing a traveller's song?
Please do.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
I wasn't a singer. I was not taught to sing. I had older sisters that did 30 verses and that, and you could fall asleep listening at the start and you're waking up at the time they finished. So I love this song, and it's a song I'm sure if Martyn had heard it, and maybe he did, he would have enjoyed listening to it. It's called the Dowie Dens of Yarrow. There was a lady from the north, you'd scarcely find her marrow. She was courted by 9 gentlemen and a ploughman boy from Yarrow. As we come out the high hill and down the glens in Arrow, it was there he met 9 gentlemen come fight with him in Yarrow. Oh, will you choose the gun, or will you choose the arrow, or will you choose the gid broadsword and fight with us in Yarrow? I will not choose the gun, nor will I choose the arrow. Ah, but hand to me yon gid broadsword, and I'll fight with thee in Yarrow. Well, 3 he slew, and 3 withdrew, and 3 lay deadly wounded, and up stepped her brother John, and pierced him through the bosom. Go home, you false young man, and tell your sister Sorrow that her true love's gone, lies murdered on the dowie dens of Yarrow. As she come o'er the high, high hill, and down the glens in Arrow, it was there she met her brother John. Come speak to her of Yarrow. Oh, brother dear, I've had a dream filled with sorrow. Last night I saw you dripping blood on the dowie dens of Yarrow. Sister dear, your dream, indeed it has proved sorrow, for your true love's gone, lies dead upon the dowie dens of Yarrow. That lady's hair's 3/4 long, and the colour of it is yellow. She has tied it round his middle smile and carried him home from Yarrow. Oh, mother dear, make me my bed, and make it deep and narrow, for my true love died for me last night. I shall die for him tomorrow. Oh, daughter dear, dry up your tears, and speak no more of sorrow. I shall wed you to a higher degree than a ploughman boy from Yarrow. Oh, mother, you have 5 fine sons. You could wed them off tomorrow, but the sweetest flower that ever grew was my ploughman boy from Yarrow. That maiden's gone into her bed so deep and narrow, and now she dances with her love on the dowie dens of Yarrow.
Beautiful. Thank you. Wonderful. We've only got a few minutes left. We were having a chat about how we should finish off, and I drew the short straw. Jess insisted, well, if this is about Martyn Bennett, who was a piper, that was his first instrument, and the Travellers, then we should finish with a set on the pipes, which I'm very happy to do. You can have the big ones or the wee ones. You want the big ones? Actually, you're getting the big ones for you. Martyn, as I said earlier, was a composer as well as everything else, and one of his most famous orchestral pieces was called Mackay's Memoirs, and it was used as one of the musical interludes at the opening of the Scottish Parliament, for example, and it was written for the students of Broughton Music School in Edinburgh, where Martyn himself had gone. And it's an amazing piece of music, but it's based on a pibroch, called Lament for Mary MacLeod. Mary MacLeod was from Harris originally, but spent a lot of her life with the MacLeods of Dunvegan as a nurse, a wet nurse, and she claimed in one of her poems, she was a poetess, a bard, that she had nursed at least 5 lairds in her life. And lots of stories about Mary MacLeod herself. She was reputed to have been buried face down at her own request. Quite what that was about, we're not sure. Anyway, this P-Rock, I'll just play a little bit of it, was the basis for this orchestral piece from Martyn. The instrument I'm playing, so Jess, myself, and these pipes all have a thing in common. We were all born in Aberfeldy. The pipes first, in 1884. They're MacDougall's of Aberfeldy. They actually belong to a friend of mine who lived near Seattle. And I used to, when I go over there a lot, and I used to tease him when I went because I coveted his bagpipes. And I used to say, I've got a repatriation order from the Scottish government. These pipes have to go back to Aberfeldy. And then sadly, just a couple of years ago, he got sick and died very, very suddenly. And the next time I was over, his wife presented me with the pipes. So they're a very special set. And anyway, we'll finish with just a little quick snatch of Lament for Mary MacLeod.